My name is Abigail Price, and I was 29 when the smile on my sister's face rewrote the meaning of betrayal in my life. It was the kind of smile that made you think everything was fine, everything was perfect, everything was sacred because weddings, by nature, are made to deceive us with beauty. The venue was a dream we'd both talked about since we were girls: white roses trailing along golden railings, crystal chandeliers dripping from carved ceilings, the faint scent of vanilla and champagne in the air. Everyone looked their best. I was in my gown. She was in a dress she chose herself, despite being one of the bridesmaids. "It's champagne, not white," she had said with a laugh, as if proximity to the altar wasn't a statement on its own. I should have known. But you don't look for knives in hands that once braided your hair. You don't expect war from the person who held you after your first heartbreak. Her name is Madison. She's 27. And that morning, she hugged me tightly, whispered, "I'm so proud of you," and kissed my cheek. I believed her. I still wish I hadn't, because 30 minutes before I walked down the aisle, she knocked gently on the bridal suite door. I was alone, staring at my reflection, wondering how much of what I saw still felt like mine. Her voice came quiet, like a favor being offered. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I remember the way she closed the door, the way she didn't sit, the way she smiled again. But this time, the smile was different. Not celebratory, not sentimental. It was rehearsed, tight and cold. "I slept with him," she said. No build-up, no apology, just 3 words that collapsed everything I thought was real. I stared at her, blinked twice, waiting for a punchline that never came. She tilted her head. It wasn't just once, but the last time was last night, after the rehearsal dinner. My throat dried so fast I couldn't form sound. My fingers clutched the edge of the vanity as if the wood might hold me together. "I thought you should hear it from me," she added, as if that made her honorable. "Before you marry someone who never really stopped wanting someone else." The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was rebirth. I felt something inside me fracture but not break. Something hardened, became still. I nodded, not because I understood, but because it gave me time to think. "Thank you," I said, 2 words that must have startled her. She stood there, waiting for me to fall apart, but I didn't. I turned slowly, looked her in the eyes, and smiled back, not out of forgiveness, but out of clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when you realize someone has underestimated the weight of your silence. She left the room thinking I'd walk away from the wedding, that I'd scream, cry, break things, but I didn't cancel a thing. I kept everything exactly as planned. The guests, the music, the aisle, the officiant, the photographer, the altar, even the cake. Because if she wanted to hurt me where it mattered most, I was going to teach her what it looked like when the one who bled didn't scream but rebuilt the entire battlefield. At the ceremony, she stood behind me, smiling in every photo. My groom stood beside me, holding my hand. The vows were said, the rings were offered, and when it came time for me to speak, I took a slow breath and turned to Madison. I handed her the microphone. "You seem to know him better than I do," I said. "Go ahead." She froze. The silence in the room wasn't confusion. It was horror, realization, shame. My fiancé looked like the ground had been pulled from under him. Madison didn't move. She couldn't. "No?" I asked softly. "Then I'll go." And I did. I walked out of the ceremony, out of the hall, out of their story. But not to hide. I left because a stage that hosts betrayal deserves to be empty. I wasn't broken. I was calculating. And that walk was not a retreat. It was the beginning. The beginning of what they would soon learn was far worse than any confrontation. It was what I became in silence. 2 days passed. No calls from him. No apologies from her. Not even a text from anyone in my family asking where I had gone or why I'd walked out of my own wedding. That kind of silence tells you more about people than their words ever could. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It confirmed something. They never expected consequences. Madison had always believed she could get away with everything: late-night secrets, stolen moments, backhanded compliments masked as affection. And Adam? He was too polished, too practiced. A man who made a living on charm, who knew exactly how to look like the victim even as he carved you open with a smile. They believed I would vanish, that my silence was surrender. But I was just preparing the stage, and the show was about to begin. On the morning of the third day, I sent out a message simple, elegant, and tailored with the same cold precision Madison used when she picked a dress too close to white. Private dinner to discuss reconciliation and healing. Invitation only. I knew exactly what tone to use. Not accusatory, not emotional, just vague enough to pique their egos. The venue? A rooftop restaurant downtown with panoramic views and press access they couldn't resist. The kind of place where people dress to be seen and smile to be photographed. I sent the message to them directly, but I copied my old boss, a respected journalist who had always asked why I never talked about my family. I also copied a few key people from Adam's law firm, the same firm that bragged about ethical excellence. The guest list grew quietly. Former clients of his classmates from our college, one of Madison's ex-friends who once confided in me about her betrayal but was too scared to act. Every invite was surgical, every placement intentional. I wasn't hosting a dinner. I was curating a tribunal. They arrived together. Of course they did, dressed as if nothing had happened, as if the public face of unity could overwrite the rot underneath. Madison wore a gold dress. She always liked to pretend humility with metallics. Adam wore the same suit from the wedding, probably assuming it still held some twisted symbolism. I greeted them with warmth, called them by name, kissed them both on the cheek. They looked confused, but relieved. She whispered, "You look incredible," and I smiled. "So do you." Radiant, really. Ready to face the night? She thought it was a compliment. The dinner began like any other. Clinking glasses, surface-level small talk, curated laughter. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I stood. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight isn't just about reconciliation. It's about truth." And truth, I said, turning toward Adam and Madison, is a dish best served with witnesses. A projector screen descended behind me. The first image appeared: hotel security footage, time-stamped, showing Adam and Madison entering the suite the night before the wedding. Laughter erupted from the crowd. Not joyful laughter, disbelief, disgust. Then came the texts. I had printed them. Her calling me knave, him replying she doesn't even notice. The photos, the receipts, the reservation confirmation, every item cataloged, displayed, annotated. I watched their faces collapse in slow motion. Madison's lips parted in a soundless plea. Adam turned red, then white, then angry. "What is this?" he hissed. "This is illegal. This is defamation." "No," I replied. "This is public record. And by the way, you signed a waiver at the door. Standard for events being documented. You might want to read things next time before blindly accepting invitations." He looked toward the exit, but the cameras were already there. Phones, journalists, people they knew, people they'd used, now turning against them. No one helped. No one interrupted. They all watched. They all listened. Because deep down, everyone loves to see a liar exposed in their Sunday best. I closed the presentation with a final slide, a photograph of me on what should have been our honeymoon. But I was alone, and smiling, free. This, I said, was the moment I realized I didn't lose anything. I was spared. The crowd clapped, not out of politeness, out of vindication. Not for me alone, but for every person in that room who had ever trusted the wrong hand, believed the wrong eyes, forgiven the wrong kiss. Madison stood frozen, her mascara smudged, her hands clenched. Adam was already gone, slipping through the side exit like a shadow that finally knew it couldn't stand in the light. That night, I didn't just expose them. I reframed the narrative. I showed the world what betrayal looks like in evening wear and how power sounds when spoken without screaming. This was only the beginning. I had warned them in silence. Now, they'd learn in full volume. And I wasn't done. Madison had always believed she was untouchable. Growing up, she was the kind of girl who got away with taking credit for school projects she didn't do, who smiled sweetly and got extensions, sympathy, second chances. It didn't change with age. If anything, betrayal only sharpened her appetite for control. After the dinner disaster, because that's what she called it to those still naive enough to listen, she vanished from public view, temporarily, like a snake retreating into shade until the air cooled again. But I knew her better than anyone. She wasn't just hiding. She was reconfiguring, searching for the next foothold, the next way to spin the story. That's when I remembered something she never thought I noticed. The LLC paperwork that arrived at my apartment months ago, with my name listed as a silent guarantor. At the time, she claimed it was just a formality. A registration glitch, she had said with a laugh, shrugging off the fact that my social security number had somehow made it onto official documentation tied to a boutique she was opening. You have better credit. You're the safe one. I'll fix it next week. But she never fixed it, and I never pressed until now. Because in the aftermath of the rooftop exposure, the only thing she had left was the business she'd branded as her redemption arc. An interior design firm named Maison Grace, full of curated Fox French aesthetic and borrowed trust. She had started posting again, softly, quietly, trying to re-enter the world under the guise of moving forward. But what she didn't know, what she would never have anticipated, was that her business wasn't hers anymore. Not legally, not financially, not publicly. Because I didn't just verify my signature on the incorporation documents, I used it. I filed an amendment, processed through expedited channels, and reassigned majority ownership. Not to myself. That would have been too obvious, too confrontational. Instead, I passed it to a third party, a woman named Eliza Quinn, a designer Madison had once mocked in a group chat for having no taste and less talent. Eliza was now the official 70% owner of Maison Grace, and the remaining 30% split between an advocacy foundation for women defrauded by family and a legal trust bearing my mother's maiden name. It was surgical, painless, irrevocable. The day the documents were processed, I sent Madison a care package. Inside, a congratulatory card on her business expansion, a bottle of bargain wine she'd once said was undrinkable, and a printed copy of the official filing. I knew she'd receive it in the studio. She always opened mail there first, hoping for client checks, press inquiries, or attention. I imagined the smile on her face curdled slowly as she read each line. The name Maison Grace was still intact, but the signature underneath wasn't hers anymore. It was Eliza's. The accounts were frozen. The social media passwords had been changed. The website now redirected to a redesigned homepage, elegance without exploitation. Madison had been cut out of her own image. She tried to call 5 times. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed with ink and law. She posted once on Instagram, a vague story about betrayal in business and fake friends, but no one rallied behind her. Most didn't even notice. A few messaged me privately, asking if it was true. I simply replied with a screenshot of the official registry and the phrase, "I believe in accountability." Word spread fast, not as a scandal, but as justice. Adam, predictably, tried to intervene, claimed I had gone too far, that it was unprofessional, that I was destroying lives over a moment of weakness. I reminded him, in an email with my attorney copied, that misuse of personal data for financial gain is a felony in our state. I attached the documentation he once bragged about helping her file, using my information. I ended with, "If you wish to discuss restitution, have your firm contact mine." That week, Madison was forced to file for personal bankruptcy. She had taken loans under the assumption Maison Grace would pay them back, but it couldn't, because it no longer belonged to her. Eliza hired a new team, rebranded the space, and turned it into a hub for independent designers who'd been dismissed, overlooked, or burned by nepotism. The press adored the angle. Eliza gave an interview where she never mentioned Madison by name, but everyone understood the subtext. Sometimes what you inherit isn't a gift, it's a mess to clean up. But if you're lucky, you get to build something better on the ashes. I clipped the article, framed it, hung it in my kitchen, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The war wasn't over, but the first battlefield had been claimed. Madison thought she could destroy me with a single confession, but I was just getting started, and what I had planned next wouldn't just ruin her name. It would unravel the past she used to shield herself. Because betrayal isn't just about the moment it happens. It's about everything they thought you wouldn't remember. And I remembered everything. The ring had always felt heavy on my finger. Not just in weight, but in implication. It was a family heirloom, passed down from Adam's great-grandmother, an oval-cut diamond with a thin platinum band, nestled in a box so pristine you'd think it had been preserved in ice. When he proposed, he had emphasized its history. This ring has survived 2 wars, 3 marriages, and now, us. I remembered the pause before the word us, like he wasn't sure we truly qualified. At the time, I smiled. Now I understood. That hesitation wasn't nerves, it was guilt trying to find a poetic exit. After the chaos of Madison's business collapse, Adam disappeared from headlines but not from the city. He still operated in the same high-rise firm downtown, still walked with the confidence of a man who believed women were chapters in his autobiography, not co-authors. He thought that because I had turned my focus to Madison, I had forgotten him. But Adam never realized that everything I did to her was a blueprint. His chapter was simply taking longer to draft. And the ring was the perfect beginning. He hated his mother. I don't mean in the exaggerated way some people complain about controlling parents. I mean loathed. I had only met her twice, and both times he found reasons to excuse himself before dessert. She's stuck in the past, he once told me. She uses tradition like a weapon. What he meant was that she saw through him. That she wasn't fooled by his charm or ambition. During one Christmas dinner, she had looked me in the eye and said, "You're very smart, Abigail. I hope you never forget how smart." I thought it was an awkward compliment at the time. Now I saw it for what it was, a warning. After he left me at the altar, after he chose silence over apology, I reached out to her, not with vengeance, but with invitation. A handwritten note, sealed with red wax. "Would you like to reclaim something that never belonged to him?" She responded 2 days later with a short email. Subject line, "Yes." I arrived at her home in the suburbs, not dressed for battle but for clarity. A navy trench coat, hair pulled back, no makeup, just me unvarnished and unapologetic. She opened the door with the same expression she wore at that dinner years ago, poised suspicion. I didn't blame her. She stepped aside. "Tea?" she asked. I nodded. We sat in a room filled with antiques and silence. I reached into my bag and placed the velvet box on the table between us. Her eyes didn't flinch. She opened it slowly, like someone unearthing a memory she didn't want but couldn't ignore. "I don't understand," she said. I met her gaze. "He gave it to me under false pretenses, and I don't return things to liars. I return them to those who know their true worth." She didn't thank me. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, closed the box, and placed her hand over it with a quiet reverence. Then she said something I didn't expect. "He told me once that he only proposed to silence his father's doubts. That you were efficient." That's the word he used. Not beautiful, not kind, efficient. I felt something in me recoil and then settle, because now I knew I wasn't chosen. I was assigned a functional solution to an image problem. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. As I stood to leave, she stopped me. "May I do something with the ring?" I turned. "Anything you like. It's yours now." She nodded. "Good. Then I'll auction it at the charity ball next month. All proceeds to go to women's legal aid." I smiled for the first time that day. It was a small smile, but it felt real. Adam found out through the firm's internal memo the auction had made headlines in the society pages. "Esteemed attorney's heirloom donated to domestic legal support." There was a photo of his mother, regal and unbothered, holding the ring under the caption, "Some things shine brighter in better hands." He called me that night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, not furious, confused, as if he couldn't understand how everything he thought was his was now speaking without him. He said, "That ring was never meant to leave the family." I didn't reply. But if I had, I would have said, "It didn't. It just left you." He would later file a complaint about the auction, claiming unauthorized transfer, but the records were clear. The ownership had been logged in my name, transferred with documentation, witnessed by 2 lawyers, including one from his own firm. The same woman he once called too soft to negotiate. There's a kind of power in returning a gift not to its giver, but to the one person who knows it was given under false light. It reframes everything. It says, "I see you. I see through you. And I've already stepped past you." And that was just one stone. I had an entire quarry left to turn. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was their laughter. Laughter that echoed through the velvet-trimmed hallway of the hotel suite where I was supposed to wake up married. I had spent months choosing every detail of that place: the orchids in the bathroom, the champagne chilling by the window, the embroidered initials on the pillowcases. But while I was across the city answering questions from people who kept asking where the groom had gone, Adam and my sister were laughing under the same silk canopy I had paid for, mocking a ceremony I had rehearsed, and toasting to a silence they thought would never break. What they didn't know is that I had always been suspicious of that hotel. Not of Adam or Madison specifically, just of the way it seemed to be his default escape far too often. Late meetings, business retreats, unexpected conference calls. It wasn't intuition that saved me. It was curiosity layered in quiet paranoia. Months before the wedding, I had invested discreetly in the property management company that oversaw the hotel's private suites. A passive share, small enough to go unnoticed, but active enough to grant me internal access. I wasn't planning to spy, not back then. I just liked knowing I could. And when the wedding imploded, I remembered that password, that dashboard, those cameras. I logged in from my phone the same night I returned home in silence. And there they were, on screen, laughing in bathrobes, sharing wine, not even trying to be discreet, as if my pain had cleared the room for their comfort, as if the suite had always been theirs. I didn't post the footage online. That would have been too easy, too impulsive, and I was past impulse now. This wasn't about exposure. This was about surgical devastation, about destroying the house from its foundations, not from the roof. So I compiled the footage, clipped it into segments, highlighted moments, him unzipping her dress, her holding up my veil like it was a party favor, both of them dancing to a song I had chosen for our first dance. I encrypted it, watermarked it, sent it, one by one, to a select list of people who mattered not to the world, but to them. His partners at the law firm, her yoga students, our extended family, his godmother, who always believed I was too vanilla for him, her first boss, the one she used to brag about impressing. Each recipient got their own little package. No commentary, just the footage labeled from the wedding weekend. For your records, the aftermath was slow and corrosive, exactly as I had designed it. Adam's firm issued an internal review of his conduct, citing questions regarding moral integrity. His promotion was paused indefinitely. Madison lost 3 of her private clients within the week, one of them citing personal misalignment. My aunt called my mother in tears, asking why she was kept in the dark about such an open scandal. But the best part, neither of them could publicly deny it, because nothing had been shared publicly. There was no link to disprove, no viral post to dismiss, only private shame, sent in digital envelopes, silently opening one by one like tiny bombs. They tried to trace the source, of course. Madison texted me 3 times dry, desperate messages like "we need to talk" and "what do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer. Adam tried to send a legal notice to the hotel. It bounced back. I was no longer just the bride who had been left. I was a stakeholder, a quiet ghost in their hallways, the kind you don't see until the mirrors crack. 2 weeks later, I received a single envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a photo of them, sitting together in what looked like a cafe, both wearing sunglasses, both looking away from each other. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "You win." But they were wrong. This wasn't a game. Game's end. This was just recalibration. And the cameras? They were still there, watching, waiting, because some stories don't need narration, just the right audience. And I had chosen mine with precision. There's something surgical in the way greed exposes itself when it believes no one is watching. And my family, for all their performances of love and concern, never hid the fact that what they truly craved wasn't union, it was division. Of land, of assets, of legacy. When my grandmother died, she left behind a coastal estate in Hyannisport. It was a place of salt-rusted railings, chipped teacups, and sun-faded portraits, nothing glamorous, nothing that would impress their curated Instagram feeds. But the land was valuable. Developers had been circling for years. Madison had once called it a sleeping fortune. Adam, during a family dinner months before the wedding, had joked that it would make a perfect second home for our future summers. The estate was technically in my name, a gift my grandmother had given quietly, without ceremony, just months before her passing. She told me, in a voice both brittle and defiant, "Keep it in the family, but not for the family." I never fully understood what she meant, not then. But now, standing in that same parlor where she used to knit through storms, I finally did. This house wasn't built for them. It had survived better people, and I would not let it die feeding vultures. I waited until Adam and Madison submitted their offer. Yes, their offer. together. A legal partnership, one where they intended to co-invest in a shared real estate project, as their email so delicately phrased it. They thought I would be eager to rid myself of the past. They even included a spreadsheet, projected renovation costs, profit margins, a mock-up of what the Harborline residences would look like. 20 for luxury units, 1 infinity pool, 0 memory. I responded with silence. And then, quietly, I filed the paperwork to reclassify the property as a nonprofit cultural site. I partnered with a local women's collective, survivors of domestic manipulation, emotional betrayal, and financial exploitation. I donated the estate in full, not as a loss, but as a reclamation. We named it the House of Red Threads, after the yarn my grandmother once used to mend the dresses of women who couldn't afford new ones. Every room was preserved. Every diary she kept was digitized. And in the largest room, once the ballroom where she hosted post-war gatherings, we created an exhibit. One wall was called Inheritance of Hurt, and on it, framed and hung with surgical precision, were reproductions of messages, receipts, screenshots, and letters that told not just my story but the stories of dozens of other women who had been betrayed by those closest to them. Among them, the floral invoice for the hotel suite Adam and Madison had shared, a printout of the social media comments mocking me for overreacting. And in the center, an empty engagement ring box, placed beneath a plaque that read, "Some gifts are never meant to be kept." When the inauguration happened, I invited the press, quietly, strategically, not tabloids, journalists, feminist columns, cultural critics, historians, the kind of people who understood that shame isn't erased in private, it's contextualized, it's displayed. Madison found out through a friend, one of the few she hadn't alienated yet, who sent her an article with a photo of the estate's new entrance, a gate inscribed with my grandmother's initials. Adam saw it a day later when a client forwarded the same article, asking if it was related to that situation he'd been so secretive about. They didn't confront me. What could they say? It was legal. It was mine. And now, it belonged to every woman who had ever felt what I felt. I never responded to their texts, but I heard, weeks later, that they tried to make an offer again, this time as benefactors, a last attempt at relevance, at rewriting the narrative. Their request was declined by the foundation's board. I wasn't even in the room. The estate now hosts monthly workshops, art residencies, and lectures on emotional recovery and legacy reconstruction. And every time a woman walks through its doors and sees that wall, she doesn't see scandal. She sees survival. Framed, preserved, reclaimed. They always say the devil is in the details, but in my family, the devil never bothered with the fine print because he assumed the angel would never read it. That was Madison's flaw, not her betrayal, not even her lack of remorse, but the arrogance of assuming I would stay soft forever. She had grown so used to manipulating her way into people's lives, smiling through mistakes, seducing forgiveness with tears she could summon on command, that she forgot. Once I stopped crying, I started planning. And plans, when sharpened to a point, become weapons. I waited for the right moment, not revenge out of rage, but redirection of power. I didn't want her to feel the pain I had felt. I wanted her to feel something worse: irrelevance, silence, legal limitation. I wanted her to realize that her voice, so sharp and performative, was no longer hers to wield. I wanted her to sign it away. It began with a letter, handwritten, with a tremble in the script that I intentionally exaggerated. I made it look like vulnerability, like I was reaching out. I told her I wanted peace, closure, an end to the headlines and whispers. I mentioned therapy, boundaries, growth. Words she had used against me countless times, now reflected back with the sweetness of an olive branch dipped in honey. She replied within the hour. Yes, she wrote. I've been thinking the same. The meeting was set at a neutral location, one of those Scandinavian-style mediation offices with glass walls, curated plants, and silent tea on bamboo trays. We sat opposite each other, and for the first time, she looked uncomfortable. Maybe because I didn't. She was expecting apologies. A teary embrace. Maybe even one of those fake "we've both made mistakes" moments she adored for the camera. Instead, I placed the document on the table. 47 pages, double-spaced, watermarked, legally binding. It was titled, Mutual Cessation of Familial and Public Engagement Rights. But that was just the beginning. The contract outlined a full separation, not just emotional, but representational. Madison would cede all rights to use my name, likeness, or personal history in any format: print, audio, video, or anecdotal. She would sign away her ability to reference me in interviews, podcasts, memoirs, even private panels. Any violation would incur financial penalties and immediate injunctions. The language was airtight, reviewed by 3 separate attorneys, 2 of whom had their own reasons to hate her. She flipped through it, her fingers trembling, her face cycling through disbelief, offense, and finally, panic. "What is this?" she asked. "You're asking me to erase you from my life?" "No," I replied. "I'm asking you to erase me from your performance of a life." She tried to argue, to reframe, to manipulate. She said she needed time. I said the offer was valid for 1 day, and I left her with the papers and a pen. She signed 6 hours later. I knew she would. Because there was one clause buried in the middle that she wouldn't dare risk. The NDA weaved into the agreement carried an implied threat that everything she hadn't told the world yet about what really happened the night of the wedding, the hotel footage, the estate scandal, might leak if she pushed. In her mind, signing was the lesser evil. But what she didn't realize was that the contract wasn't about silencing her past. It was about silencing her future. Any attempt she made to rebuild herself on the ashes of what she did to me would now be a legal breach. The silence became immediate. Her social media froze. The vague inspirational captions disappeared. The podcast projects halted. She stopped tagging mutual friends. Her name began to drift into a soft gray zone of forgotten personalities. When someone mentioned her in a discussion panel a month later, the moderator cut them off with, "Let's avoid legal issues." I didn't even need to say a word. What I had created wasn't just a document. It was a muzzle, a border around my existence that no longer required me to scream. Madison, the sister who once laughed in my face while stealing what she could never deserve, now lived within the walls she signed herself into. Her words no longer carried weight. Her stories were legally amputated. And I walked away lighter. Not because I destroyed her, but because I made her irrelevant. And for someone like Madison, that was worse than hatred. It was invisibility. There's a particular type of cowardice that only reveals itself at the check-in counter of an international terminal. It's the kind that wears sunglasses indoors, books first-class tickets under middle names, and believes that geography can undo guilt. Madison and Adam believed that if they just got far enough somewhere with white sand, foreign language, and no cell service, the weight of what they'd done would dissolve into the tide. They thought betrayal expired with distance, but I was already waiting at the gate, long before they packed their matching luggage. Not in person. Of course, I had no interest in seeing them tan and smiling. But in silence, I had worked for weeks to ensure that their little escape would become their first prison. The trip was supposed to be spontaneous, though I knew it had been planned meticulously. They booked a week at an exclusive resort in Tulum, a place that brands itself as a sanctuary for rebirth. The irony would have made me laugh if I hadn't already weaponized it. The reservation was under her name, but the credit card used belonged to him, an arrangement that triggered enough red flags in the payment gateway to buy me time. I contacted a firm I knew specialists in reputation litigation and cross-border legal enforcement. We reviewed the contract Madison had signed in Topic 7. She had violated the image clause 3 times already, subtly, almost mockingly, in whispers on closed Instagram stories and messages to acquaintances. That was enough, but I didn't want to cease and desist. I wanted interruption. So I filed a motion for anticipatory breach and identity misappropriation, naming Adam as a co-conspirator for knowingly facilitating her actions, including public insinuations and private defamation. The claim wasn't designed to win damages. It was designed to trigger jurisdictional alerts. And it did. At 4:50 p.m. on a Thursday, I received confirmation. A hold had been placed on both their passports, pending a formal appearance in civil court. They wouldn't be arrested. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about stopping them, about pulling them out of their glossy fantasy and planting them back in the soil they'd poisoned. Meanwhile, I scheduled the real surprise. The day of their departure, I sent a courier to the resort in Tulum, a sealed envelope. Inside, a collection of printed screenshots, messages from Madison to Adam about how this trip will reset everything, and a note from me, handwritten, short and final. There is no after for traitors. Enjoy the layover. That same morning, they arrived at JFK smiling, holding hands, trying too hard not to look over their shoulders. At check-in, the airline clerk tapped a few keys, frowned, then picked up the phone. Adam laughed nervously. Madison adjusted her sunglasses. Within minutes, two plainclothes officers arrived, not with guns, not with handcuffs, but with documents. Service of notice. They were advised that their presence was required in New York civil court within 72 hours. Leaving the country without attending would trigger a default judgment, and Adam's assets would be frozen under provisional motion. Their luggage was quietly removed. Their names were marked. And the honeymoon? Cancelled. Not with a bang, but with a clipboard. They tried to argue, of course. Adam puffed up, demanded to speak to someone in charge. Madison cried her favorite tactic when charm failed. But the officers weren't there for emotion. They were there for compliance. The same kind Madison had never shown me. Later that week, they did appear in court begrudgingly, in borrowed suits, with eyes dark from lack of sleep. They hoped the story wouldn't make the news. But the courtroom sketch artist had already posted her rendering online. It went viral within hours. The image showed the two of them side by side, not as lovers, but as defendants, faces downcast, hands tight, no escape. What they never understood was that my revenge was never about making noise. It was about rearranging the silence, about letting them plan their future, only to realize they were walking straight into mine. A trap of paper and process, of signatures and citations, of justice dressed in strategy. And the best part? I was home, wrapped in my own quiet, sipping tea, watching the storm they tried to outrun catch them at the gate. Madison always believed in controlling the narrative. It was her favorite game, bending perception just enough to make betrayal look like misunderstanding and cruelty sound like misunderstood passion. She had built her teenage years on performance, first in school plays, later in curated Instagram captions, and eventually in corporate presentations delivered with just the right touch of vulnerability to seem human but never weak. So when the court appearance took away her physical mobility, she sought refuge in her last fortress, her voice. That's how the podcast began. It was called Unfiltered, a title so heavy with irony that I almost applauded. The trailer dropped on a Monday morning, 6 days after the court hearing. The description was vague but loaded. A woman silenced by shame finds the courage to speak her truth. Within hours, the algorithm began to favor it. She had the perfect recipe: betrayal, controversy, and the illusion of confession. But what she didn't know, what she never anticipated, was that I had been building something too. And my silence had not been passive. It had been tactical. I had purchased ad space on every platform that carried her show. Not just banner ads, but full pre-rolls and mid-roll slots, customized by location and demographic. The team I hired tailored the campaign with forensic precision. Women aged 25 to 45 who had engaged with content about narcissistic siblings, wedding disasters, or family estrangement. I wasn't trying to bury her story, I was preparing to eclipse it. Because while she was whispering about things you don't know yet, I was about to show the world everything they needed to see. The premiere episode was soft. She cried within the first 7 minutes. She spoke about childhood scars, how we were never close, how jealousy played a role in the distance between us. She never used my name. Of course she couldn't, not after the contract, but she said enough that anyone listening knew who the unnamed villain was. She painted herself as a complicated survivor. Adam was mentioned briefly, described as a casualty of 2 broken sisters. I listened to it twice, not for pain, for timing. I marked the exact timestamps where she tiptoed into liability. And then I launched mine. It wasn't a podcast. It was an ad series, 30-second audio inserts placed inside her own episodes. In each one, a different voice, always calm, always female, reading excerpts. Real ones, from hotel receipts, from the court filings, from her own messages. Did you mean it when you said you'd ruin her just a little for fun? When you signed the contract, did you understand Section 7.3, waiver of all public testimonial rights? Each clip ended with a quiet signature. This is not her truth. This is the record. It was surgical. The comments under her podcast began to shift. What started as sympathy transformed into skepticism. Listeners began quoting my ad inserts verbatim. They asked questions she couldn't answer. Some demanded proof, others left. The ratings dropped, not drastically, but enough for the sponsors to pull back. She released a second episode anyway, doubling down. This time, she hinted that she had proof of my manipulation, that she had videos no one had seen. I let her say it. I wanted her to. Because in my possession were contracts she had signed for previous commercial work, each one with a clause about confidentiality and reputation protection. When she claimed to have unseen videos, she was referencing footage recorded on sets owned by those companies. That was my final trap. I alerted the brand's legal department. Within days, a cease and desist landed on her desk. Not from me, but from them. And suddenly, the podcast was gone, scrubbed, archived, silenced. But the story didn't end there, because by then, the public had already started creating their own edits, splicing her emotional monologues with my legal inserts. TikTok turned her tears into cautionary tales. YouTube compilations titled The Truth Behind Unfiltered racked up millions of views. She had tried to weaponize her voice, and I didn't stop her, I just made sure it echoed in the wrong direction. She had called it her truth, but truth without accountability is just fiction with good lighting. And in the court of public perception, facts whispered strategically become louder than screams. I watched her fade from the charts. Her Instagram went private, her LinkedIn removed. People stopped quoting her and started quoting the documentation. And all I had done was let her speak into a room I had already wired. Because revenge doesn't always need rage. Sometimes it only needs clarity. She lit the match. I just handed her the paper with her own lies printed on both sides. I've always believed that time has a sense of humor, an old, dry, elegant sense of irony that waits patiently for everything to fall into place before delivering its punchline. Theirs came in the form of a thick envelope delivered to my apartment one crisp Thursday morning. The return address? A boutique law firm known for defending the reputations of people whose reputations were already in ashes. Inside, a lawsuit filed jointly by Madison and Adam, claiming emotional distress, character defamation, and loss of future income. I read every line without blinking, not because it surprised me, but because it was beautifully predictable. It was their final act of desperation, a last attempt to wrestle control of a story they had already lost. But the timing was perfect. Because the date set for the initial hearing was already etched on my calendar, and not because of them. It was the day I was scheduled to stand on a stage and be recognized for something far more permanent than revenge, legacy. 6 months earlier, in the quiet aftermath of their implosion, I had poured everything into building something real, an initiative called Daughters in Silence, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women estranged from their families rebuild their lives with legal, financial, and emotional support. It started with one room and a single volunteer attorney. Now, it had grown into a national project. Quiet, deliberate, powerful. I didn't attach my name publicly until the board insisted I accept a humanitarian award for it. I had originally declined the ceremony. I don't like applause. But when I received the notice of their lawsuit, everything changed. I arved yes, because now it wasn't just a speech, it was a counterpoint. The morning of the award, I dressed slowly. Nothing extravagant, no red silk or dramatic neckline. Just a navy suit tailored to fit a woman who had nothing left to hide. At the courthouse, my legal team appeared on my behalf. I didn't need to be there. I had already filed a countersuit months ago, sealed and ready, waiting only for them to make the mistake of breaking the silence clause again. The court clerk time-stomped everything. The judge postponed the hearing. They looked unprepared, flustered, already drowning in the paperwork my lawyers handed over with surgical precision. Meanwhile, across the city, I took the stage. The ballroom was filled with women survivors, lawyers, social workers, students' faces that knew grief and grit, dressed in borrowed dignity and earned confidence. The MC read a list of accomplishments. I didn't hear most of it. My mind was back in the courthouse, imagining the look on Madison's face when she realized the only microphone that mattered that day was in my hand, not hers. When it was time to speak, I walked up to the podium, took a breath, and held the silence for 3 long seconds. Then I said, "They tried to sue me today." Gasps. A pause. I smiled, but I was already booked. Laughter rose from the crowd, not because of the punchline, but because of the victory it symbolized. I continued, not with bitterness, but with precision. I spoke of betrayal not as a wound, but as a blueprint. I talked about how being underestimated is a gift. How silence, when cultivated carefully, becomes strategy. How every woman in that room had been dismissed at some point, labeled as overreacting, dramatic, or unstable until they became unstoppable. I didn't name Madison or Adam. I didn't need to. Their relevance had expired. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about the architecture of rebuilding. about turning collapse into foundation. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was deep, sustained, reverent. The kind that says, "We see you. We know what you've done. And it matters." That night, I left the award beside a window, under the moonlight. Not as a trophy, but as a time stamp. Proof that while they were drafting accusations, I was drafting impact. And when I opened my phone later, there it was, a missed call from their lawyer, followed by a message. "They're willing to settle." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I wasn't in a courtroom. I was on a stage. And sometimes the only real justice is being applauded in the exact moment someone else expected you to be humiliated. Let them file whatever they want. I already filed myself under something far more permanent, free.